Hi again, everybody. I thought I'd talk to you a little bit about the kind of work that I do in the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, because it's one of the things that, as I think Kobe pointed out, we probably would have talked about that if we'd been meeting face to face. So I'll just share with you a little bit of what I do. Um, I've been very focused in the last decade or so in my SoTL work on thinking about the different levels, micro, meso, macro, and mega, and the impact that work might have, how we might move SoTL forward institutionally, and how we can think about our intended outcome, so that if our intended outcome is at the micro level, if we engage in SoTL to improve our teaching, that is not necessarily relevant that we publish it in a peer-reviewed journal. It's helpful to share the results, but if our intended impact is at the classroom level, then it's far more important that we implement it in our practice and maybe collect more data and see what's happening there. So some of the stuff I do in the classroom, I had a course a few years ago where the course process was considered very unusual at the time. I handed out a half-full syllabus and told the students that they were responsible for filling in the rest. Um, and it ended up that partway through the course, a number of the students said that this was the course unfolded very differently than most courses. And I had an interesting group of students who took a lot of ownership of the whole course process. So we ended up doing a self-study with about a third to half of the class after the marks were submitted, to look at what people's experiences had been of that process. And it's been interesting. We presented at a national and an international conference. A small subset went to Portugal, which was pretty cool. And we wrote a paper about that. And that group actually still meets for dinner once a year, which is also kind of cool. That's not relevant to SoTL, but it's a cool aside. The classroom level work that I'm engaged in right now is looking at the impact of the Wikipedia assignment I do in the intake course. And I did some previous work on that. Sorry, itchy nose this morning. Looking at how that reflective paper that went with amending a Wikipedia page, doing a critique on a Wikipedia page and then fixing it, for those of you who didn't have the fun and the challenge of that assignment, how it affected people's understanding of knowledge and how it is created and disseminated in the 21st century in that socially mediated platform. But what was really interesting the first time I did the assignment was that the reflective papers showed all kinds of other things about students' identity development as graduate scholars, and went places that I hadn't anticipated. So that became the study of the first phase. And the phase that I'm doing now, that is part of a grant that goes with Brock's Chancellor's Chair in Teaching Excellence, which I applied for and got last year, is looking at the ways in which the Wikipedia assignment develops graduate outcomes. And I was fascinated to find that there were some, this is just on first run of the data, we're working on analyzing it more deeply now, but that the student understanding of some of the intended outcomes for graduate skills, as well as the Conference Board of Canada's employability skills, was quite different from my own. So I was surprised that students did a self-report on to what extent they felt that that assignment had slightly used and developed, or significantly used or developed, or not at all used and developed certain of the graduate level skills. And I was surprised that things like developing an understanding of safety was rated really, really low by the students, where I thought, well, online safety and creating a profile that wasn't traceable, et cetera, or, as much as you can. I thought that was really important in terms of safety in the 21st century, whereas the students were probably thinking more about, women's safety and that kind of thing. So when we had the conversation about that, the understanding shifted, and it made me think about things like asking you to post a job and think about the way you're developing skills towards that, that's important, to have people make the bridge for themselves between what they're learning in courses and how it might apply in whatever their real world is going to be. And I'm not sure we do that enough. So that's been an interesting first outcome out of that. So those are a couple classroom level things. At a more meso level, I don't do a ton of work on Meso level would be in terms of impact on the department. I don't do a ton of research on that. I'm starting an online teaching group to have profs who are considering, because we're going to have a number of additional profs doing blended and online learning in the fall, and for some of them that's a new venture. So we're starting a group so that we can chat and share what works and what doesn't work. For me, that will be thinking about how the way people teach online fits with their online teaching, or sorry, their overall teaching identity. So the way I do things, where my focus is on trying to create a discussion community, it's not necessarily going to work for everybody, but we'll at least talk about what some of those fits might be. I do a lot more SoTL at a mega level, nationally, internationally. I've been involved in boards. I created SoTL Canada, which is a significant organization now for faculty across all disciplines who want to engage in scholarship of teaching and learning. I've been involved in a large project looking at how educational developers, so people who work in teaching centers, support scholarship of teaching and learning, looking at it through a leadership lens to see what are the ways in which they enact leadership. So not just the teaching and learning centers, we also looked at faculty and some administrators. That's been really interesting because I've been thinking about how we shift culture institutionally. And although our participants, and we had 75 international participants who wrote reams and reams of data for us, way more than I wanted to analyze, although it was interesting. Although they talk about the importance of shifting culture towards one where the institution values teaching and learning more strongly, most of the ways in which they support scholarship of teaching and learning is by giving people resources, so workshops or connections to literature, so on. And so when we think about transformative learning, some of you are familiar with the work of Mesereau, we could probably figure out pretty quickly that although giving people resources is an important start and might begin conversations, it's unlikely to transform culture in any meaningful way. So I'm curious right now, I'm thinking about the gaps between those, those levels of impact. Um, and I've done other stuff that I would be interested to talk about if anybody wants to hear about it more, but I think that's enough for now. Thanks.